My name's Bill McKibben. I'm an environmentalist. I'm not from Maryland at all. I'm displaced from my home country up in Vermont. But I'm here because this is one of these critical elections for climate policy around the country. And Ben Jealous is one of the most remarkable environmental advocates as well as civil rights advocates that we have.
Yeah, we were speaking a bit off camera about how much excitement there's been around these midterm elections. People have lost so much faith in, the executive branch federally that a lot of people are looking down ballot. Talk about what this election could mean for climate change and for the environment.
Well, look at the signs around you just to get some sense of just how nuts people are about getting out to vote. I think there's this huge pent-up demand since 2016 to go get it right this time, You saw the UN report 10 or 12 days ago about climate. The bottom line of it was we're out of time. I mean, if we haven't made a massive shifts in our direction in the next 12 years, then we're not going to be able to do it. And 12 years is that's like 2 more presidential elections. It's 5 more of these congressional elections. I mean, we can't just keep putting this stuff off now. We actually have to do it. And some of that's in Washington and at the congressional level, and some of it's at the state level where there's much more freedom for people to act, If you elect a governor in a state like Maryland, they may actually be able to get something done, not wait for the, Senate to get its act together.
The incumbent running here in Maryland, Larry Hogan, is very popular, even amongst Democrats. And he touts his environmental record. He talks about how he, enacted a fracking ban. Yeah. He put in billions into restoring the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, so it's not that he's done nothing. And it's not that anybody except Donald Trump's done nothing, The question is, are we doing anything on a scale that's going to catch up to this problem or not? Or are we doing kind of what we need to do just to kind of not have people angry at us all the time and things? I'd much rather have, that than Donald Trump, but I'd much rather have someone who actually was serious about real change. The temperature of the planet keeps going up. Therefore, we're not doing enough to deal with this problem. We're not doing enough in America. We're not doing enough in Maryland. We're not doing enough in any place to deal with it.
And could you talk a little bit about how Jealous has distinguished himself from that environmental record of Hogan?
So Jealous is such an interesting character because people look at him and think, well, he's a civil rights leader. He ran the NAACP. Civil rights must be his main focus, and it is in certain ways. But the first political stuff he ever did as a young man was work on environmental stuff. As a young newspaper reporter, he covered a lot of these environmental justice issues that I think really brought it home to him. And so when he took over the NAACP, he really helped bring this question of environmental justice to the forefront, helped change it from environmentalism to environmental justice. And that's been really, really key. I tell you, when we started things like the fight against the Keystone Pipeline, there weren't many political figures at all who wanted to be engaged in that. It seemed too far out and things. By now it's become the sort of wellspring of an enormous amount of really good activism. But one of the very first people who got engaged was really the first 2 prominent national figures who got engaged were Bernie Sanders and Ben Jealous. And I've been real loyal to both of them ever since because they were willing to do this stuff before it was popular, while it was still hard. And God bless them for it.
And in terms of enacting that at a state level, Jealous has said that he would commit to setting a target for renewable energy. Have you talked to him about what that target would be, when we need to get there?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what target they're going to, how much by what year, but the fact that we'd be moving swiftly in the direction of 100% renewable energy, which is where we need to go, is the important thing. 10 years ago, this was would have been sort of wild-eyed to say. But in the last 10 years, the price of a solar panel has come down 90%. This is now the cheapest way to generate electricity in most of the places. What's wild-eyed now is to say, let's build some more pipelines, because when you do that, you're locking Maryland into another 50 years of the same kind of energy system we have now. That's really irresponsible about the future. And instead to try and say, let's get ahead of this curve economically and environmentally, that's really smart. The places that prosper are going to be the places that are ahead, not behind, of the curve that everybody knows is coming.
And how does a state like Maryland get there? Is it through market solutions like cap and trade or a carbon tax, or is it through regulation at the state level?
Well, some of each. I mean, one of the things I have to be careful about is that because I wrote the first book about climate change, came out 30 years ago next year, I sometimes find myself wanting to say, oh, if only you'd listened to me then, because 30 years ago, there's a lot of really gentle things that we could have done that wouldn't have caused anybody any, very modest price on carbon and that kind of thing. Having waited this long, we're going to have to be, do more dramatic stuff. And so, price on carbon is one thing, but there's also going to have to be a lot of support for renewables going forward. And there's going to have to be a firm hand at telling the fossil fuel industry no more expansion. I mean, they managed to sneak through this last pipeline here in Maryland. That's got to be it. I mean, we can't build more fossil fuel infrastructure anywhere.
Could you talk about Jealous's policies regarding the Chesapeake Bay, especially because it's such a huge economic factor for voters here? I think that's something that people are really concerned about in terms of the environment.
Absolutely, man. So we've made some strides in cleaning up places like Chesapeake Bay. We've made a lot of strides in cleaning up a lot of places around the country, but all of that is now coming apart as the temperature warms, and in the case of the oceans, not only is their temperature going up, but their pH is going down because of the carbon in the atmosphere. And these are now the really deep threats. There's no way to make Chesapeake Bay a healthy place, save dealing with climate change. That's going to be the bottom line for all marine ecosystems going forward. And so for places that are like Maryland, low to the water, I mean, go to Ocean City, I mean, low to the water, and depend on the ocean for both economic value in terms of fishing, but also in terms of tourism, and just where the ocean is a part of people's psyche, part of how they identify who they are. I mean, what would Maryland be without crabs to eat, In that kind of world, we've got to take this super seriously. It's really time for Maryland, I think, to embrace the idea that civil rights and environmentalism are crucial parts of the future. Not something to be deferred or delayed, but to be put center stage. I mean, climate change and economic inequality are the gravest things we face, the things that can undermine America as we've known it. And so it's time to actually stand up to them.
I guess one of the issues that Jealous is facing, though, is that so many voters do, again, see Hogan as somebody who has a pretty strong environmental record. He's down in the polls by some 15 points. 538 gave him a less than 1% chance, or a 1% chance of winning this election. So what do you think the strategy is for the next 10 days?
One has to say the polls have been wrong in this country before, as we found out in 2016. Let's hope they're wrong in a different way this time around.